Welcome to the RiskAdvisor.com podcast. I'm Sal LaFrury, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. Today we want to talk about managing security for a changing landscape. So, Jim, with everything going on in the world today, I'm sure you've seen changes in security. What do you think about the landscapes changing today?
Well, I think that what we're engaged in right now is pretty unprecedented. We're seeing a tug of war now between what's captivating the consciousness of our customers, our end users, and what have you. We saw almost a shift away from being security conscious toward the health and safety issues that were driven by COVID. Then, of course, we had all the unrest of the past few weeks, and that was a reality check of, hey, we're in the security business, and obviously we can't abandon that. So now it's a balancing act, between health and safety and security, and neither extreme without the other is going to work. So
the whole health and safety thing, right? I mean, we always used to worry about health and safety was trip and fall. Somebody fell down, cracked their head open, and yet that was the health and safety part of it. Today we're looking at, taking temperatures of people, wondering, what their medical conditions are. And you just kind of look at that and you go, do you really want to trust that to the guard services that you have and the personnel that you have? So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, so let's get to our guest, who probably have a lot more interesting stuff to talk about than us. Our guest today is Alan Stoddard. He's an experienced global technology executive with a long background in security and telecommunications. As the Vice President, General Manager of Verint's Situational Intelligence Solutions business unit for the past 4 years, and he has helped transform the VMS supplier into a global leader in delivering intelligence security solutions for mission-critical environments. He has a degree in aerospace engineering from MIT, and prior to Verint, he held senior level management positions with Honeywell Security, AMX, and Nortel Networks. He currently lives in New York State with his wife and 2 sons. Alan, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here. It's great to see you.
So before you and Jim wind up taking over this, I got one question. Yeah. I told you I wouldn't trap you with a question, but I got to trap you with a question. And that is, with an engineering degree from MIT, when VCRs were big, did you know how to program it?
I still know how to program it. That's what sons are for. That's why we have children, right?
That's right. Let them do it. And they seem to know how to do it, the little bastards.
It comes natural to them. It's amazing.
So in your world, what you've seen, how is the security environment really involved, given the different domestic trends that we're seeing and the different changes in the landscape?
I think you and Jim really hit the nail on the head at the beginning, right? Is that with COVID-19 especially, everything's changed in the last 4 months, 5 months. And we've moved beyond traditional security, the way we think of it. You talked about health and safety, but now those are truly interrelated, right? You can't just worry about stopping the bad guy coming in the front door because now the potential threats come from people that you want inside, your employees, your customers, your contractors, others, but they may be a threat. They may be an unknowing threat, right, if they're infected. So it's really changed, I think, the way we think about the whole role of security. Are they infected? Are they healthy? Are they practicing social distancing? Are folks wearing masks? What's the occupancy of your store? Are you reaching the limits that you need to? Right? Just a totally different set of questions that we all have to think about. And so it's changed the nature of that role. It's changed even to a certain extent, who's involved in making some of those decisions and enforcing some of that role as well. But it's not just about keeping the bad guys out anymore.
So what are some of the specific things that you're hearing from your customers, and what are they asking for? Are they looking for more technology? Are they looking for a technology solution?
They're looking for help, right? I mean, I think a lot of them are just overwhelmed at the moment because the scope of this. There's no recipe. There's no formula for how to attack this, and certainly they all have different challenges. They're all unique challenges. You've got retailers or folks on the restaurant side that are looking at a vast number of customers coming in, and they need to worry about flow control and occupancy rates and that sort of thing. You have enterprises that have maybe different concerns with respect to just keeping track of people that are traveling. Where have they been before they come back into the office? What other sites have they visited, and how do they manage all that? You have manufacturing environment, which is an environment all its own. But primarily they're overwhelmed, right? There's no playbook, and they're just looking for help. They've got to balance safety, privacy, health, security. There's unknowns around what you can ask employees and customers to do, what you can force employees and customers to do, what regulations may exist, and those are varying from state to state, from country to country, and even, unfortunately, from day to day, right, as things evolve. So more than anything, they're looking for help. But I think the key here is really focusing on not the technology or the product, but the problem and the solution. And everybody's got, is being impacted differently at the moment, and therefore we need to address those needs differently, and really be able to listen and adapt and be creative, because this isn't cookie cutter. It's not just selling something they've already used.
I got to agree. I think some of the problems that we're seeing with our clients, especially in the reoccupancy. We do a lot with commercial real estate, so we're trying to develop these plans for the reoccupancy, and you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, what is it that's going to be mandated by the state or the feds that we're going to have to do? And in our case in New York City, what is going to be mandated? And it's bad enough that you get very little direction, and then when you do get some direction, it's just counterintuitive. It just doesn't work. Like we were looking at with high-rise buildings, getting people into the building. Well, if you start doing the 6-foot standoff distance, a building that has about 1.5 million square feet in it with about 6,000 occupants during the course of the day would wind up in a traffic study we did took about 11 and a half hours to get the building occupied.
Yeah.
It's you just can't operate that way, right?
Yep,
So,
yep.
How do you have to adjust to it? And I think that's the biggest problem, is that the information you get is half-assed, and what you do, and what is coming out, there is no clear direction. So you're right. There's a lot of confusion on it,
and it's going to keep changing, right? Because we don't know today what we're going to know tomorrow. The guidance is going to change. The rules are going to change. The environment's going to change, and each of those challenges is unique. High-rise is different from a manufacturing environment. It's different from a retail store. So, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But I think a lot of it really comes down to being able to have solutions that are flexible, right? That are adaptable, because even if you think this is perfect for me today, tomorrow's going to be different.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So Alan, as if we needed an additional variable as we're trying to do the right things here by our customers. There's, in addition to the push and pull between health and safety and security. There's nothing that happens, in this world, seemingly in the last several years, that does not get politicized, and this is right in line with that. In fact, we have recently seen some proactive political action groups, driving censorship of First Amendment rights to free speech, which we really had never thought we would see in this country. Now we have some city councils that have, enacted bans on the use of some surveillance and investigation tools that law enforcement has used, including facial recognition. So, do you think the use of technology will be increasingly and successfully targeted and blocked going forward?
Yeah. So, we could probably spend an entire show on facial recognition and other equally powerful biometric tools. It's a challenge for sure, and it's to a certain extent a minefield. But I would say this: I've seen, especially across the globe, I've seen facial recognition tools used to help identify kidnappers, to identify known terrorists before they can act, to protect individuals from known stalkers and violence associated with that, and any number of other areas where they've helped to protect people from violence. But I've also seen it across the globe, sometimes used to misidentify people and misused to infringe on the rights of average citizens. It's not really about the technology. It's about how it's used. And it's about the rules, the regulations, and the processes that we put in place, as is really true, I think, with any powerful technology tools, to make sure that it's used safely, that we can use it effectively to get the benefits that it truly provides, while minimizing the risks that are there associated with it. And I think that's something, unfortunately, we can't just litigate through sound bites, right, and kind of headlines. It's tough technology, and I would go off on a side with that a little bit. I think a lot of countries have put a lot of thought into their data protection, their technology efforts. And in the U.S., we seem to be a little bit behind on having those serious discussions in a way that can provide guidance so that we can benefit from these and keep people safely. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to having those discussions across the interest groups and getting down to real facts, because there's a lot of reaction and emotion. And we're I think making a lot of decisions based on emotion and not necessarily the facts involved.
I think if we continue to come back to the issue is how the technology is being used. If we continue to focus on the why we're using the technology, that really is the cover.
Yeah.
It's like LaSalle in law enforcement. That's it was the reason why you get a warrant. You justify why you're going to be doing what you're going to be doing, and that gives the basis for taking those actions. And I think the same applies for technology going forward.
Yeah. What's the why? What's the purpose? And what's what's the process, the oversight? Make sure it's not being misused, and then let it be used, and let us get the advantage out of it, because it's helped a lot of people, and I've seen it in person, and you don't want to take that away. But you want to make sure that it's not being misused.
Last week we did a show on crisis communications, and we were talking about the fact of the matter is that when faced with a crisis, most people, the first thing they do is they knee jerk to it, and once you start knee jerking to it, it just creates a whole nother crisis, and then you knee jerk to that, and you just eventually you get so far away from it that you forget what started it.
Yep.
And it's the same thing. I think when people look at it, when they see the technology that's out there, and then all of a sudden something bad happens with it, they focus on that, and there's a knee jerk to it. It's like, we can't do this no more. We can't have this. And like the examples you were given before with where a stalker victim, could feel comfortable knowing that there's, facial recognition software and they're going to pick up the guy a lot sooner.
Yep.
Or any of the other technologies that give us the ability to track.
Yep.
The only thing I wish is that I would have had these tools when I was doing all of this stuff. And I've been out of the department now for almost 18 years. So it's, a lot of technology has changed, but boy, would it have been great to have some of this stuff.
When you can identify a kidnapper in the matter of minutes, right? It's a matter of life and death, as opposed to, missing it entirely or spending hours or days, right, going through manual processes. So, but, I think it's just one of the things, people are adverse to change. And no matter what the change, and they're doubtful. They can get frightened, especially with technology that they don't understand. And I think a lot of this is we don't do a really good job explaining. Right? We let the headlines explain what things are instead of being able to get the real information out there, both about how things work and the value and the purpose, as you said. Right? Mm-hmm. What's the intent? And I think if we can do a better job of that, we'll have more success.
I want to take about just a few seconds and sort of set up for the next area that I'd like to talk about, and that's talking more about the global issues. We've talked about some of the domestic issues. But while we're here, I just want to remind the listeners that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal Lafreri. And we invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and to subscribe to this podcast and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with either one of us or both of us, please, again, go to the website, theriskadvisor.com, and you can set that up. So I'd like to just jump into an area now talking about global issues and some of the issues that we face across, when we look at clients that have, multiple locations and clearly across the globe. What are some of those differences in how businesses are responding to what's going on now? What are you seeing in that regard?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you teed it up a little bit here. Certainly, one of the areas that's different is some of the regulations, some of just the overall acceptance of some of these technologies, right? Whether it's facial recognition, biometrics, things such as contact tracing, location tracking, et cetera. A lot of differences across the globe in what's acceptable, what individuals are comfortable with, what governments allow. And from very, very strict regulations in Western Europe, for example, to very lax regulations elsewhere, to a very cautious approach on the part of people in the West, to a very accepting approach for a lot of citizens, elsewhere in the world. So certainly that acceptance and the ability to look at technologies and advanced technologies is one. I think the other element is right now we really see just a more aggressive approach in general to using technology solutions and investing in all these capabilities in South America, in Asia Pacific, and in some parts of Europe than we do in Western Europe and North America. They're just generally being more aggressive, more flexible, I think a little bit more nimble, so that provides different challenges, different opportunities. If you're for the executives, I think that have those operations, as you said, that cut across boundaries, they need to be very cognizant of that and understand. Certainly, they need a global approach, but it needs to be grounded as well in the individual specific regulatory environments and legal environments and the cultures that can vary quite a bit from place to place. So they've got an additional challenge to navigate as they try and implement these solutions.
Yeah, I gotta think that the legal issues from country to country have got to be difficult, and the diplomatic issues. How do you deal? And I guess part of that is the culture, understanding the culture, and knowing what to deal with. But dealing with the legal. I remember, years ago, and I'm assuming it's still the same. In France, you couldn't do a private investigation on someone.
Mm-hmm.
That was illegal. And in the U.S., obviously, it's wide open and you can do it. So it being cognizant of those legal issues, those legal challenges are tough. Do you find the diplomacy or the diplomatic issues having to deal with the State Department or something like that becoming more problematic, or is it just another thorn in the side?
So certainly in our direct experience, not so much, right? Really, from being a U.S.-based company, it primarily comes down to, if you have restricted technologies, there's the handful that you can't sell to, and it's pretty black and white, and we understand what that is, and you deal with it. I think from a diplomatic standpoint, I don't personally run into a lot of these issues. The real hot button really are the legal ones, and unfortunately, again, it's not only a dynamic landscape from country to country, but it's evolving. We can go back to facial recognition as an example. That's varying even from state to state in the U.S., right? So it's not just working in other countries, but it's working in different state jurisdictions in the United States. And so you've got to be very cognizant of the specific requirements of the location that you're in when you're doing anything new, right? And that's really what it comes down to. When you're looking at some of the new technologies, no matter what they are, because it can even to the point of just hosting information on the cloud these days, right? Where we've got a SaaS or a cloud-based solution and you're hosting data. Now we've got to be very cognizant of how that data is gathered, how it's protected, what rights people have to understand what's there to erase it. Gdpr obviously is a huge consideration, not only in Western Europe now, but then a lot of other countries are really kind of adopting it by default. Companies that are global, that don't have a global standard, are starting to actually defer to that as, okay, here's a baseline. At least we understand what that is. We're going to utilize that for our requirements across the globe because we know we have to do it in Western Europe. So it really is, right now, it's almost impossible to do anything new without bringing your lawyers into the discussion, and lawyers that have specific knowledge of the specific jurisdiction that you're operating in.
So is it another can of worms to actually looking at modifying technology platforms to conform to these different regions, or does that create more problems than it solves, and we're better off, with a homogeneous platform, and it's just what feature sets are enabled or disabled to accommodate the local laws and practices, so that you don't end up with all these variations of platforms out there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Certainly, as a manufacturer, we prefer the latter, right? We prefer a single platform, but really for a global company, as an example, that's what they prefer as well, right? They don't want to have different solutions, different products, even if they're related, but different loads, different versions, in the different parts of the world. That becomes challenging for them to implement, to support, to maintain. So our approach on that very much is one that is having a platform with the flexibility, right? Where certainly we've got a minimum set of capabilities. So for example, again, getting back to encryption and security, you absolutely want everybody to have that capability. But where features may or may not be deployed, whether it's just because of the needs in different regions or the legal requirements in different regions or the culture, as we talked about, you want to be able to have the platform be flexible enough to turn those on and off, but still have a single solution as an enterprise, with that global operation. You can manage that, but know that you don't have different platforms that you have to learn, that you have to train on, that you have to, buy and support. So our approach is very much around flexibility, right? And then being cognizant of the requirements and making sure that there's a comfort level, because sometimes just saying you can turn a feature off isn't enough, right? It has to be truly disabled in some way, shape, or form. So you've got to have it, go above and beyond sometimes to make sure that it meets those requirements of not being available, right? Just because somebody flipped a switch in the back room, right? But if you can do that, and if you can do that right, it really is, I think, the best of both worlds.
So a lot of our listeners are security directors and chief security officers or chief information security officers. When you're dealing with multiple countries and you're dealing with multiple systems and different laws and legal, it's critical that you wind up having a company that has enough horsepower to be able to deal in each of those countries, so that you got that one point of contact. Unfortunately, we see it occasionally where they wind up going with a local vendor, and now you wind up with 4 or 5 different systems, and it's bad enough when it happens with here in the United States, but now you start dealing with this across the globe, and you get different systems. Any further suggestions, thoughts, comments on that about if a security director has got 5 or 6 different locations?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Quit.
It really is. It's always that trade-off between short-term pain or short-term gain and long-term pain. It's always the easiest thing to do, most expedient to say, somebody local, I'm not going to switch it out. We make an acquisition, we'll leave them on who they are. We'll have 4 or 5 different systems, and they're it's a local supplier. Without fail, in the environment that we're seeing these days, as a global security director, you have to have a global view into everything that's going on. More than anything, it's because of the data that you want to be able to pull in. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, I think. But, security systems these days are really becoming about intelligence, right? And it is so challenging to gather that common set of intelligence from a lot of disparate systems. The impact on your operations, on your implementation, on your processes, on your support, on your training of disparate systems, they just accumulate over time and really grow exponentially. And so, there are tools that we can put out there where it's inevitable to help put a layer over top of that and shield some of those differences. But ultimately, I think you pay a price. And to the extent that you can build a common platform, again, adapting it as necessary to the local requirements that you might have, but have the same software, hardware capability across the globe, inevitably we've seen those companies be much more successful, quicker, faster, more efficient in the long term. So I really think that's the way to go.
And I think one of the other things that we're starting to see in the trend, right, is that you're getting all of this intelligence data, or all of this data that we're collecting,
Yeah.
and looking at it as a form of intelligence. And then now you start to see where companies are looking at the value of that data. And where traditionally it would be, a hard, fast rule of, security was access, that was, in, out, and doors were locked and what have you. Now we're starting to see, requests for what kind of data are you holding, and how can that be utilized by companies to be sold, and it becomes an additional source of revenue, right? So, you start looking at, people coming in and, one of my concerns had been with the temperature sensing, was now you're starting to collect biological data off of people. And if we're doing it for the really common good of trying to solve COVID and, prevent people from getting sick, okay, that's great. But what's really winds up happening is, now you got people coming in, you're tracking their data. So you're having, now I start to know, how well you're feeling, right? And now I could start to pattern you. And when you start looking at, biological variations of, certain species, all of a sudden that becomes valuable data. And if I'm seeing that the temperature is 98.6 one day and, 99.8 another day and, 100 the next day, well, there's a pretty good, I can make some decent assumptions of what's going on, and I can take that and sell that data. And all of a sudden, that person's going to wind up getting a coupon to buy something, right? It's that the ability with all of that data, and I think that's sort of the frightening part, because I think collectively, with all of our experience, I think there's still times when we sit down and we read something and go, wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm still constantly amazed at how well Google does in the micro-targeting their ads. To me, it's a scary concept, right? So it clearly is out there. But I think similar to the discussion on facial recognition and biometrics and technologies, it's all about what are you collecting that information for, and what are the rules and processes around which you're using it. I think if all of us were to say, we want to make sure that we don't have sick people coming into the building because they may, infect and kill people, that's a very fair use that most employees would absolutely sign up to if they felt very comfortable that's what it was being used for. If there's a fear that it's being misused in this context as well, one, you're not going to get people to provide that information, and when it does, it certainly will be misused. So, and we've got to put the right rules and processes around that. But it's also when you say that, I think we often there's wrong things to do, and you don't want to do that. Okay, but it's not always as black and white as that, right? So
that's the problem. The line's gotten gray.
A line is very gray, right? Yeah. And so you look at that information. Where I thought you were going to go with this discussion is a lot of companies these days. We've got close to 1 million cameras, one of the largest retailers on the globe, right? For security purposes. Well, when you've got all that square footage covered with security cameras, there's a lot of other things you can do with that information. You can understand where there are bottlenecks in your flow so that you can be more efficient, right? Is that information you should use and that they should use? Probably, right? You can start to understand where there's safety concerns because there's choke points and people are falling and tripping, or there's a hazard, or there's a spill. Should they use that? Absolutely. Should you use that information around how long they loiter in front of certain brands? Or exactly what they're buying, or what they're, okay, maybe they have, but then you go step by step by step, and they say, well, that obviously they have the right to use that information. They're trying to keep people healthy. They're trying to improve their operations. Wait, that's other information. I'm not so sure that I want to know. I spent 5 minutes in front of the whatever healthcare section, maybe, right? And now people and you sell that information to Procter and Gamble, or whatever, right? So It is great, and the only way you get through that, I think, is a fair bit of transparency and openness and dialogue around, certainly within the company, right? What the policies are, and what the intention of the information is, and I think to the extent that we can shine a light on what it's being used for, and again go through that process of explanation, people get a lot more comfortable with it.
Well, there's collateral headwind and benefit to that. As an age-old integrator, it always frustrated us that security was, never had the funding on the front end.
It was a cost center.
It was a cost center, and now when you look at business, the benefit of some of these edge devices for business operations, it can generate additional revenue, which can help with the budget constraints.
Absolutely.
So it's a balancing act.
And I would tell you, it's a much different story, right? When you can go in as a manufacturer with an integrator partner and go into a customer and say, here's how you can actually generate profit internally. Your own operation, not selling data, but making yourself more profitable, increasing your own sales, improving your customer satisfaction, right? Becoming a service and profit center and not a cost center. And there are a lot of operational, some of the most interesting discussions we get these days are around how we provide operational enhancements and improvements, not what we would think of as traditional security. And that's one of the great evolutions of the security market these days, I think.
Cool. Well, talking about evolution, we talked about some of the domestic issues, we talked about some of the global issues, and next what I want to chat about is talking about some of the solutions. But first, let me remind you that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and myself, Sal LaFreri. Once again, we're going to invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com or to subscribe and listen to this podcast on your favorite station. Follow us on our social media programs like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us as a speaker at your upcoming event, or you'd like to consult with either one of us or both of us, just go on to our website, theriskadvisor.com, and help set that up. So, moving into an area I'd like to call solutions. We talked about domestic, we talked about global. Let's talk about some solutions. What guidance would you provide to business leaders now? As obviously they have to consider, how to respond to the current threats. We talked about some of the confusion that that everybody's experiencing, and we're looking at new risks that are popping up. How do they become a little bit more proactive in developing a security structure now?
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a little bit to start with, right? Which is first and foremost, don't fall into the trap of thinking there's one right answer, right? Understand your challenge and understand that your challenge is unique. And based on that, right, you really need to be able to work with a partner, right, that can help understand your needs and tailor a solution to your needs, but understand as well that those needs are going to evolve in this really dynamic environment that we're in right now. So what you need to be looking for are solutions that are flexible, right? That can grow and change and evolve with what you're trying to do. If it's a point solution for where you're at today, odds are it's not going to be sufficient for where you're going to be at a month from now or 6 months from now.
That's true.
If somebody says, everybody's using it, it's probably not right for you because everybody's problems are different. So that's certainly one area. I think, based on that, we talk about really looking for things that are intelligent, that are integrated, and that are, when I say incremental. Intelligent, we've talked about, right? As we move forward, it really is about the data and the ability as a security director to not just be able to put up barriers, but to understand what's going on, right? And to use that intelligence to be able to respond and react in a very smart and efficient way to evolving and changing landscape. We talk about integrated, and one of the things that we really haven't touched on is the fact that these solutions for health and safety, you want to integrate them into your overall approach. They're not separate, right? You don't want to build a different paradigm, a different process, a different set of tools, you want to integrate that in, because for the most part, you're going to be using the same resources, the same, implementing through the same people, the same functions within the company, using the same assets. So you want an integrated approach. More importantly, all these different technologies are part of the answer. The ability to pull in a thermal camera or just a temperature sensor, the ability to pull in data, right? Have somebody fill out a form on the web and say, I haven't traveled, I've taken my temperature, I'm safe. You want to be able to integrate that in. You want to be able to integrate that into your access control, right? To make sure, okay, we're only letting people in that we've had their temperature taken, they're good. We want to be able to integrate that into some internal management processes. So to really do this smartly, it needs to be intelligent, it needs to be integrated, and it needs to be incremental. And what I mean by that is essentially, you don't want to have to do a big bang, right? You've got a problem today, go solve that problem, right? And then grow incrementally as you need to, and make sure that the platform can support that. I think it's really important that facing this unprecedented challenge where we don't have formulas, we don't have recipes for how to solve them, where everybody's got a different problem they're trying to solve, and where there are no recipe books, and that's changing. It's very easy to not do anything, right? It's overwhelming, it's complex. Start somewhere, implement something that works and fits for your needs, but just make sure it's a solution that can grow and evolve with you in an incremental fashion.
One of the things that Jim and I had talked about was with the FDA when they came out with the thermal cameras and they came out with the ruling. They said, okay, there's only one camera that's actually certified to do medical testing for a temperature, but go ahead if you want to use whatever you want to use, and we're not going to interfere as long as the emergency exists. Mm-hmm. And companies were going out and they were looking at, spending $200,000 to get these thermal imaging cameras. And it was sort of being shoehorned into, a facial recognition system and an access control system. And it's, you look at it and you go, okay, you may think it's solving your problem today, but 6 months, 7 months, at some point, the emergency is going to be declared over. Yeah. And you're going to wind up, stuck with this equipment, right? And then for your liability from one end switches totally to the other side. Why are you using this? Yep. It's not authorized.
Yep. And so you've got to be flexible, and you've got to make look at that up front, right? What investments you're making. And the key here, I think, is not the big bang approach, right? It's just let's understand the basics. Some of it's real simple these days, right? Just a questionnaire. Where have you been? Are you feeling sick? Have you had any symptoms? Have you been exposed? Right? Take your temperature, you self-declare, we've got that information, right? And as we were talking earlier, sometimes it's just about having, protecting against the liability. Certainly, we want to keep people safe, but we want to make sure that we're enforcing those processes as well and have traceability and auditability, to all of that we can go back and say, wait a minute, now they seem to be infected. What did they say on that day? Do we have any information that helps us understand, what part of the building they were in, et cetera, et cetera? So now we don't have to shut the whole place down. We can shut down their office, clean it, we're good.
Yeah, I tell you, I said one of the important things that I think as an integrator all my decades is for us to always be reminding end users, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Yeah. And whenever you have a crisis, like this, you have out of the woodwork or all of the manufacturers with all sorts of widget solutions that's going to be the one size fits all. And obviously they're out there to sell their stuff.
Yeah, well, 9/11, right?
9/11,
right after 9/11.
Right after 9/11. And and again, it's what you gain much more credibility with an end user when you displace, or help them in that position of being a goalie on a dart team with no pads, of being bombarded with all of this propaganda, from solutions providers. And integrators are, many times we've got decades-long relationships with end users, and I think we can help them with a seasoning of experience, having seen technologies come and go, manufacturers come and go. Continue to say to yourself, what is in the end user's best interest, both short-term and long-term, and also the optics of the decisions that you are making to your employees, and to your customers. You really need to exercise wisdom, judgment, and not jump to the first shiny object that looks like it would be potentially solving a problem. It really does require restraint and seasoned judgment.
Yeah, and a perspective, right, and experience that they can bring to it, having a view to many manufacturers and over time, and then understanding as well, as you say, not just the current problem, but how you want to leverage that going forward. I think you're exactly right.
Sometimes it's difficult just telling a client no.
Yeah.
When you're sitting there and you're talking to them and you see that they're going down just a bad path, and you try and tell them no, right? Because you're all geared to yes to a client, right? Keep the client happy, say yes. And sometimes when you got to be that wet blanket and say no, we had an incident not too long ago with with a client calls me up and was looking at a piece of technology and said, what do you think about it? And I said, give me a little bit and I'll get back to you. And we looked at it and we went, yeah, no, this isn't right. So we called him, yeah, this isn't right. And we explained why. And he was like, oh, okay. And then 20 minutes later he calls and he had another piece of technology. And we look at that and I call him up and I'm like, oh, God, I was like dreading the call because I got to tell him that he's 0 for 2.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, I'm not trying to ruin your day. I'm just trying to do the right thing for you and tell you, this isn't good.
But if you tell them why, then there's a basis for, it's not just being prejudicial because you've got a favorite, supplier or whatever. Your rules of engagement, have to be clear and rational.
And that's how you gain credibility and value as well, right at the end of the day. Right, you got to be able to balance it.
So as we're getting ready to wrap up, clearly Verint's got an entire line of products that are out there. Any specific products that you really like, you think help solve problems?
Yeah, well, we do, and certainly, we love to talk about them. And one of the products that we've got out there that I think is very pertinent today is our Nowforce solution, which really we've developed into modified into a tool that's I think very powerful in dealing with these challenges with COVID and the ability to integrate systems to collate information from employees and really to tie together employees or citizens with security personnel and responders in kind of a holistic environment to make sure that everybody's getting the information they need when they need it, trackable and traceable, and can respond and provide support as necessary. So we're really very excited about that. But I would honestly step back and say what we're really would like to encourage people to look for isn't a product, but as a partner, right? And whether it's at the integrator side, whether it's at the manufacturer side, to your point, somebody that they can trust, help them navigate through these new challenges. Somebody who's got perspective and different tools that they can bring to solve whatever problem you have, as opposed to trying to shoehorn everything into a specific product. And certainly we try and be that trusted partner, trusted advisor. We work with a lot of integrators across the globe who do a very good job of that as well. And my guidance to folks out there that are working through this challenge and looking for solutions would be not to get focused on products, but to get focused on people and company. Look for good advice that they can leverage, and focus on solving problems, not buying products.
Sounds like solid advice. No. Appreciate it, Alan. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and coming in to chat with us. We'd like to remind everyone they've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal Lafreri. We're asking you to subscribe to this show and to like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to the webpage, theriskadvisor.com, and you could easily set that up. Also, if you happen to know someone that would make a great guest, Again, go to the webpage, theriskadvisor.com, and make that suggestion to us. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can hear the show on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and of course, stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in next week.
theriskadvisor.com